Cloud. All right, hello folks. Welcome to Open Canvas Working Group meeting number 7. If you're watching this recording, you might be wondering what this is about. We're trying to make an open standard for Canvas or Infinite Canvas apps that basically an interoperable format that allows things like TL-Draw and Excalidraw and even Node and Wire programming tools and to all communicate with one another and be able to pass canvases around between those different tools. You can go find out more on the website at canvasprotocol.org. Let me share this thing to bring that up. There we go. On canvasprotocol.org, you can find a link to past meetings and recordings and such like that. But most of the activity happens in GitHub, github.com/OCWG. There are discussions there. We try to keep most of our stuff in a permanent format, like in discussions, where people can come and contribute and see what people have been talking about. There is a Discord if you're into that kind of thing, so feel free to join up with that. Main deliverable we're working on right now is a draft spec that you can find in the spec repo under OCWG, working towards getting basically a document that describes the first OCWG format. And then the other deliverables are basically demos of that specification. So Michael's going to show a demo today. And yeah, we had a demo from a couple of folks last week as well. So basically just pushing on two fronts of like trying to get this spec to a point where we feel like it's good enough to share more broadly, but also doing some implementations of the spec to make sure that we kind of run up against any holes in it. And we'll talk about some of those today. We do not have any introductions today since I know all of you already. So we can move right on to Michael, your demo. You want to go first?
Yes. Yeah, that's fine. I will share my screen.
Let me turn on screen sharing for you.
Yeah.
Host tools, enable screen sharing. Okay, there you go.
Let's see. This one should be the. Do you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Should be. Yeah, I'm developing a visual programming environment in my spare time as a side project. And I'm also very much interested in also exporting to the open canvas. What you see here is a small flow that's just a counter, but I will show other flows in a minute. And on the bottom right, you see the export of the current spec.
Very nice.
At least on how I read it. And also the fallback is implemented. It's just the text of a node. And one of the things that I don't have currently yet is importing back. And since this environment is of course quite structured, I don't have a concept of a rectangle. Every node has some kind of meaning. So I probably need something like that if I want to build, for example, a flow with TL-Draw and import that in my application.
You're saying that nodes, how is each node represented? Like, what were the choices you made about? So there are canvas. Okay, this is a.
Yeah, I currently put the properties of the nodes from this system in a sub property, and this probably will go and work differently when the spec evolves.
Sure.
I like proposal of Max. I would not advise putting all this in under properties because of naming conflicts between different tools. I can imagine that all tools have also got something that's called type for different things, but currently in this tool, type is the way it specifies what node is. This is a variable. This is that expression. You also see that that expression that counted +1. that's written there. Or
Cool.
the set variable that's here. I also have the connections in there, which are the arrows arrow schema in the spec.
Mhm.
And
Very cool.
this is just one connection from one node to another, but I have more complex scenarios. Let's see. Maybe this is a good example because nodes can have different ports. So you need to have to specify that somewhere. Let's see if I can find it. It's quite, this is a little bit of a bigger flow, of course.
Mhm.
Cannot find that quickly, but it should be. It's not that important, I think, for now. This has two start points with a port name.
Mhm.
And maybe yeah, it's difficult to find it.
No worries. So you chose to make each one of the nodes in your system a rectangle, or to represent it as a rectangle, or no, or did you just come up with a one single schema for it?
Yeah, it's this is a triangle, but yeah, below the hood it's a rectangle. Yeah.
Right. And the schema, you called it code flow canvas. What was the slash what?
Well, I have different implementations.
Okay.
I only have
Yeah, what
implemented
were all the
export
schemas that you
to.
ended up using?
Yeah, well, I can. This engine is more or less a Webflow engine,
Hmm.
so you can. And this is a simple state
Cool.
machine with which you can control.
Hmm.
But I also have more of a graphic language. Although I don't want to make this a demo of my tool.
No, this
But
is very cool. I mean, I think it's really important that we understand the capabilities of the tools and make sure that there's a way of representing as much as we think is reasonable of the capabilities of that tool with the specification. Right. So obviously we won't have like executable OCWG specs, or maybe we will at some point, that you could like take a raw OCWG spec and produce some output. But that's not the goal. The goal would be to make sure that as you, like you said, open this up in TLDraw, that the things come through with some at least conceptual fidelity. Right. And that's,
yeah,
so I was curious about the different schemas that you use to represent your different objects in your, or nodes in your system. So it seems like you have these node boxes that can be a variety, they can have a variety of different things, including specifying like an expression, a variable, some things like sliders and stuff like that. And you
yeah,
represented
I
all
have.
of those as rectangles.
Yeah, the most of them are. I also have diamonds for more for conditions.
Uh-huh.
This big gray rectangle is a group a container, um, which you can place other nodes. So if you move, this is a bug, I think.
Sure.
um, and I have arrows, different kind of arrows. As you look at here, you can see these arrows are connections from one node to another. So
Huh?
if I would, I think there's a bug here and here still, but if I would move this node, then the arrow would move. These, because these are states and transitions of a state machine, they behave a little bit different than normal than these kind of nodes,
Mhm.
which receive inputs and have an output. And there's behavior behind each node. I also have a registry in which I can add other node types.
Mhm. It's interesting.
Um, let's see where I was. I also have nodes where I can store multiple images, media
Uh-huh.
files.
And is that, am I looking at a group right there, the media files? Is that a group that's the gray thing? And then there's like a button that's a separate object called an add that you would, for adding.
No, this is just a regular node type without outputs, but I've defined a form in it with an array, which in which you can, if I would do a add, I could upload a media file or give it a name, and I can reference that name in
Got it.
in the flow. This
Interesting.
this node reacts
Mhm.
to actions from the state machine. It shows it's an image show image container, and it shows
Mhm.
nodes depending images depending on that media library.
Mhm. Did you, um, what did you do with relations in this case? For each of the arrows, did you add a relation mapping as well? For each of the arrow?
No, I was wondering what I should do with that if that was needed, but I know with the algebra that's needed. You have you have to do an special relation for the arrows, but currently I have not done that, but it's easily to also export uh, a relation with for the connections.
The group.
I
Yeah,
currently only
that's the set right
export
there. Mhm.
the
Very
group as
cool.
a set.
Yeah. So what we were thinking about for arrows is we kind of separated the idea of an arrow as a like you're pointing at something. Like for example in TL draw or oh I guess I have a TL draw. Well, the if for those of you who are in the TL draw, you can just draw an arrow from nothing to nothing, and it doesn't represent. It's not actually a relation in any way. It's more like a graphical object for calling attention to something. Right? An arrow can have no relations at all. Or an arrow can connect two objects, in which case it has a relationship. Yeah, exactly, right? So that, yeah, just like that. So in this case, this is exactly the case. Thank you for drawing this. So in this case, you would have three nodes, but no relations, right?
Yeah,
And so then connecting those two, connecting that arrow to one of those objects should also add a relation. Now, as you mentioned, TL draw doesn't have, at least like base TL draw. How should I say this? The TL draw doesn't natively take advantage right now of relations in its base feature set. But a lot of the things that people are doing to add functionality on top of TL draw, they are taking advantage of the fact that there are parent-child relationships in the TL draw data model. But that's just for
and
TL draw. If you were exporting to another tool that was primarily a conceptual tool, like XState or something like that, you would want those relations to transfer over. Um,
yeah.
so.
Then TLDRAW, you've got the bindings. That's what you believe you export. If you need connect, if you export an arrow, you export the arrow itself, but also a binding. And the bindings connect the endpoints to the rectangles or nodes in
Right.
TLDRAW.
Right. Yes, TL draw has the ability to set the points at which you are binding onto that object so that you can very finely customize where the arrow sits. And I would assume that your rectangles have a similar thing of there's a binding on the left and right side of each one of your rectangles. Um,
Yeah, ports, I call them.
ports. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
depending on each node type, you have different ports, which kind of different meanings.
exactly. Yeah, I think the interesting piece here is I believe, and I wish Ryan were here to speak to this, but TL Draw actually also has an idea of parent-child relationships between objects, and that's purely conceptual. And it happens to be one to one. It happens to be when there is a parent-child relationship, there is also an arrow in TL draw, but that is sort of incidental that is the case. So yeah, that's probably something we should make clearer in the spec is
I also had a question actually,
Yeah.
how should the schemas properly be handled? Currently, I just I put in the schema of a node in there, and how it should be, to what schema it should be linked in the spec. So you can so that you know that code for canvas node is a rectangle in OCWG.
Yeah, it's a
I
great
forgot
question.
to add connections here, but they should be here as well.
Mhm.
In the spec was talked about the JSON schema
Mhm.
format, I believe, but I couldn't. I've looked at it, but I couldn't. Yeah, I couldn't make sense of it how it was intended.
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine that you could put maybe all properties of code flow canvas node in here, but I don't think you want that.
Mhm.
But yeah, this seemed to make sense for me. That if a different tool wants to import and export that this tool made, that you know how to represent it.
So in the semantic web in RDF, you usually link a schema by URL and then cleverly host the URL so that a machine will get back the schema file, the technical file, and the web browser will get a human readable web page. And so you use just one URL to identify it and provide everybody its stuff. But yeah, the setup is a little bit tricky. Maybe supplying two URLs, one for download, one for info would also work.
Could you example description of that on GitHub, so that I can or point you have URL where it's described, so I can read more about it.
Yeah.
Not yet understanding what you mean.
Yeah, that's definitely something I had on the agenda to discuss today because I saw your GitHub discussion about it as well. So there, Max, there is already a GitHub question
Okay.
discussions question from Michael
Perfect.
on that topic. It definitely, I went back and read through the schema right before this call and made some updates to the schema. I mean, sorry, the spec. Sorry, not the schema. I read through the whole spec and made some updates to it to align it with previous meetings that we've been discussing. And you're right, we don't fully specify how the schemas should be specified. We also don't specify how to extend the schemas based on one another or like extend from another schema. We were so the general idea though is that the schema, the OCWG file. Hey, Orion, let's go in. The OCWG file, when you get a file as someone who's receiving it, you should have everything you need to render that file, meaning that you need the schema for all of the relevant schemas or all of the nodes and relations in that file need to be in the file itself. And so we were thinking about representing that using JSON schema, and we can give some examples of how that might look. So in this schema section that you've got right down here, Ryan, just to catch you up real quick, Michael was giving a demo of CodeFlow Canvas exporting to OCWG's format. So right now, what you're seeing right there is he's got a couple of objects, and as he changes those objects, it updates the iframe in the bottom right with an OCWG format live. So pretty nice.
Oh, that's really
nice. But yeah, so then if we have so yeah, we would use JSON schema to represent the schemas and put them in the schema section. And I believe JSON schema has a way of specifying a relationship between schemas where you could say this schema extends this other schema. Go ahead, Max. Yeah.
Actually, as we will maybe also talk about assets where files can reside inline
Mhm.
attached to it or on the web. Maybe schemas could be in the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, we should probably support the same mechanisms for inline locally and on the web, and just have parallelism there between the way that we're handling content for assets like you mentioned. Or yeah, make those use a similar method. The only
Will there
thought
be
yeah,
will
go ahead.
websites of tools need to host the schema information themselves, or will there be a registry with schema information?
Yeah, I think that's it definitely exactly. That's one of the I think one of the things that we would encourage people to do at first is just default to inlining all of the schemas. But having the capability of storing schemas externally doesn't seem a bad thing, especially what Max is referring to is something we discussed 2 weeks ago of how we would handle potential external assets like images and that kind of stuff with to refer to images directly or to talk about images specifically. We might want to be able to inline an image using like base 64 and it's just right there in the file itself, or refer to a file that's an image that's on the local file system or a local like directory that OCWG file is packaged up with, or a not just a relative URI, but an absolute URI of a location on the internet where you're trying to get that from. Let's see. And so why not, I think what Max is saying is why not support that same structure for schemas themselves, which seems reasonable. I'm going to see someone in the Discord trying to get in. I'm going to try and help them get in real quick. What other things came up while you were building this, Michael, that you had questions about?
I like that these nodes arrays are now arrays and not no longer objects. That's and I was wondering if this also be the actually Z order for the nodes, or that there will be an index like property. For example, which TLDraw uses. It has its own algorithm behind it, although it's, I believe, inspired by something else. But that makes, I think, collaboration maybe easier if tools use the same algorithm. But
You're talking about, are you mentioning Z index here? Is
yeah,
the
Z
Z
order,
ordering based on the array?
yeah.
I think the plan is to have Z ordering be its own order should be its own property rather
This
than
order of this
override.
array could be, for the spec at least, could be the order.
That is the way that JSON Canvas from Obsidian handles it. They use the array to specify the Z index, Z order. I'm a fan of explicitly specifying it with a property rather than dependence on array order. You could by convention order it by Z index when exporting it, and that helps with some like human interpretability. But having an explicit property seems, I don't know why that seems better to me. I'd have to think it through, but that would be the.
Yeah, well, if that property is how you say it in TLDraw, it's a special format. You cannot it's not a number that counts up by one. It's more like a float, so that if you want to put one node behind another node, that you just have to do some calculations and the node is in a different set order. In one of the discussions, I put a link to I think, to the code in TLDraw, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
I can see if I
Yeah,
can
I don't
find
have,
it.
I'll be honest, I don't have strong reasoning or instincts on that one. It just seems better as a property, but I would defer to someone else who has given that more thought on that specific one. Let's see. So yeah, we talked about Z and Z order. I think we have a GitHub discussion on that.
Yeah, for sure. That's,
Let's see.
I think making it explicit as a property allows for more use cases. Let's say we have a canvas that has like 3 panes of Z index, and then you can just write at each item at which pane they are. I mean, you don't need to have a canvas that just orders everything at different Z indexes.
Mhm.
It's true you can have ties, but maybe that's actually the purpose to say that they are on the same depth for whatever reason. I mean, or a spatial tool where you use your HoloLens and view it, and then things need to be at a certain depth. It just looks
Yeah.
good.
Exactly.
Just in 2D, we need to stack them all up. So it's maybe too tier draw specific to say we use the array index.
Yeah.
I'm going to cautiously say this. I haven't thought this through.
Go ahead, Ryan.
But maybe the actual Z spatial dimension could be suitable for that. The reason
Yeah.
why I'm thinking that that's a possibility
Should
is
be.
if you're working in 2D, you don't need it, and it's analogous to Z ordering already. And then in 3D, you don't need Z ordering because you have 3 dimensions, and so you're when you're drawing it, like that's not how you're calculating the kind of render ordering and occlusion and stuff like that is going to be, you know, done geometrically based on its 3D location and its geometry.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
you're
know.
like overloading the two ideas of like
That's why I'm cautious
in a
about.
2D canvas, it will be Z index. In a 3D environment, it will be its Z location, which is
It's perfect.
I kind of like it actually.
They
Well,
just sort by the Z, and then you get an order, and that's what you want.
Yeah.
And if there are ties, then depending on the use case, somebody should remove the ties first, maybe.
Just to delve into that, make sure I understand it. I like the idea, but in 3D, wouldn't it be a matter also of your camera can shift? So
Yeah.
it's not as simple as shifting the Z index because you could go to the side. Anyway, it's intriguing. I love the thought.
Yeah, so in 3D, for a given pixel, like what pixel is rendered is going to be a function of the coordinate in 3D space, the position, the position and rotation of the camera, and then the geometry. Like if you have a cube or a sphere, like the size is going to potentially overlap with other things.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
yeah, that makes sense. I think
So I guess one thing about this as well is that you would, if you wanted to take something from a 2D canvas and chuck it into a 3D environment, either you leave the Z indexes as they are because they're like useful layering and they're going to group stuff up, or you would reset them. But I guess that would be a user space thing. I don't know if we're planning for lots of round tripping between 2D and 3D, although I don't see why we shouldn't try
think
and
about
make
it.
sense.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a rabbit hole, but it does seem interesting that at least in 2D, Z index has at times a use as kind of metaphorically similar to onion skinning with animation, right? It's like there's a history component, you know, and that doesn't translate to 3D as easily. But that's a very interesting topic.
Michael.
I put a link to the
Yeah.
algorithm that TLDraw uses in the chat. It's fractional indexing.
Gotcha.
I
Yeah.
think, and I think that I'm not 100% sure, but
I did read this before, and my takeaway was that that's great that's more important for how a tool internally handles ordering rather than
Yeah.
how we should specify it in an interop format. But yeah, it's been a bit since I read it.
Yeah, I do agree, but I think that for tools like TLDraw, when you are like we are currently doing, collaborating on one canvas
Uh-huh.
and updating some a canvas in real time, that such algorithm does really help. So if maybe if we want to have if we want tools also to collaborate in real time using the OCWG spec, then maybe we do need something like this. But I'm not sure. That's
Yeah, makes
that's
sense.
a thought.
Let's see. We've got about 25 minutes left. Michael, were there other things that came up while you were working on the CodeFlow Canvas demo? We've addressed some of them already. We talked about how arrows may optionally need a relation, and to specify what's an arrow node. Make clear that an arrow node may optionally need a relation in order to indicate the relationship between the two objects. We talked about specifying how to specify schema and schema extensions. We need to clarify that in the spec. I think that's something that Orion and I can take on, because we did discuss
for my
more
tool
of this than is in the spec. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say we did discuss more about how this would work than we've actually documented, so we can get what we have into the spec documented.
Cool.
But yeah, anything else that you ran into that you want to share?
Yeah, for my tool itself, importing back, because in my tool the nodes have meaning. There's a type linked to it, a specific type. So I cannot yet, at least in my tool, import back random shapes which are not linked to any node type in my tool. So that's something that I need to handle, I think, in my tool.
Oh, I see. I see. So you almost need to decide when importing from like a TL draw that hasn't exported. This is like when going from a canvas that is not your canvas and bringing that into yours, you need to decide what type to assign to rectangles that have no type yet.
Yeah.
So you could round trip in terms of you could save to OCWG and then open in OCWG one of your own files. That works, right?
I do not understand. What do you mean?
So taking node CodeFlow
Yeah.
Canvas is the name of the tool, right?
Yeah.
And then outputting an OCWG file.
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
And then importing it back in. That works.
Yeah, that would work if I export and import back. I've done that also with TLDraw actually, but then I don't import any new nodes. I just sync the nodes that I have in my own tool
Right.
that are visible. So I
Yeah,
can
that really
change the
comes down
location.
to, I think that's a decision that your tool has to make, right?
Yeah.
That's not something that OCWG or TLDraw can handle for you, which is
Yeah.
how do I handle rectangles? How do I represent rectangles that don't yet have an assigned type?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But that isn't, I think you're right. I think you're hitting on a larger challenge here, which is that we have to how to say this properly. Tools, as interop between tools increases, there will be cases where a tool has to decide if and how it wants to deal with objects that it doesn't natively know about. Of like, should I just ignore those nodes entirely and like make sure that they get written back out to the file, or should I try to represent them as something in my system? And I'm just going to have to do the thinking about how they should be represented in my tool. So
maybe both. You need to do sometimes both, but there are some node types that you can't really represent in a tool, but others you can. But at least you have to keep, yeah, you have to be aware of them and write them back. That's a requirement, I think, probably for OCWG.
yeah, you have to maintain them and write them back out again, but you don't have to exactly. Yeah. And I think I actually did document this in the spec, Max. There's a big section that basically says, this is the hard part about supporting OCWG, is that when you have nodes you don't know, you still have to keep them and write it all back out. You can't just like drop them on the floor just because you don't know what they are. That's a great, Jen is mentioning in the chat that the GLTF extensions ecosystem also uses JSON. That's definitely something that we should go see if we can take a page from. All right, so I think we've made it through the first 3 items on the agenda. We've discussed schema extensions in terms of we just need to specify a little bit more. I guess the other piece there that I didn't write down and I want to make sure I capture is what Max dropped into chat, which is this. Boom, boom, boom. That. Cool. We should maybe handle that the same way. All right. Then Z order we can discuss more. I wanted to look at Max's post about asset handling and make sure I understand that. And then, yeah, Jen, if you wanted to talk about, if you wanted to share a little bit about the GLTF stuff in a second, feel free to like grab some links, and we'll hopefully spend about 10 minutes on this next topic, and then we can talk about GLTF. We can maybe share what's going on there. All right, so discussions. Yeah. So this is similar to what Max was just saying about schemas, that they should probably be able to be stored locally or inline at a local URI and at a remote URI. So this content can live inline as a string, as a local file parallel to that canvas JSON relative URI, or as an external absolute URI that they could dereference or look up. I think one of the consequences of this proposal is that we don't need a generic OCWG /asset
Exactly.
node anymore. It's basically everything has a type, OCWG image, OCWG text, whatever that could be marked down here, or could pull from some text resource out there at that URI piece. And this makes a lot of sense to me, and having a MIME type in content makes a ton of sense. So would we then say that like should all properties have a MIME type and content, or anytime you have content as part of your property, as part of the schema for this node, use this format, basically have a MIME type and have a content URI?
I wouldn't over-engineer it. So the mental image I had here was REST. So you have the web, you find a URL somewhere, you get it, and you get a representation. And that representation depends on your capabilities. Like you say, I'm a text-only browser. I only accept text. What can you give me? And the browser will give you a plain text variant. Or you say, I'm an HTML browser, you get an HTML web page back. That's content negotiation. In order to have that in an offline file, we need an array with multiple content versions. Each states what it is by MIME type, and then we find out where to actually grab the content bytes inline, parallel, externally. So then we can render the first thing we understand, or if we have some preference, the first thing matching our preference.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an array of content snippets, but this is already a quite heavyweight thing to have an array of different content types and have to select the right one, maybe even the right language could also be part of the content selection process as defined by the web. And then we have metadata, like these things have a position and have a color and so on. And they have like, it's what was actually a heavyweight image, and we have an alt text. And this alt text is a string, but I wouldn't go the same route again and say, yeah, actually this alt tag now you can also fetch, and it also has 17 representations in different language. No, that's just one string and that's it. And if you really need more complex things, then define it in your property bag as you need it. But in general, I would say we have content. That's what makes up the canvas, content blocks. They are arranged, and then they are augmented by more metadata so that more tools can do cooler things with them, like what Michael did with code flow blocks. But they still remain one thing with content in its essence. So yeah, that's at least a mental image that helps me to understand what OCWG actually is doing. It's arranging web-like resources on a canvas and defining an export format for that.
That actually is, I think, fairly consistent with the actual implementation of TL Draw itself.
Perfect.
Like TL Draw is implemented, if I remember correctly, they skipped the canvas renderer and rendered everything as actual like HTML elements and positioned them using CSS and all of that kind of stuff, and didn't take advantage of HTML's canvas tool. And so one of the consequences of that for TL Draw, and I think this makes sense for OCWG as well, is that you can represent any kind of HTML resource on a TL Draw canvas without having to re-implement anything. So for example, like dropping this link here created this embed, and yeah, this is it was fairly trivial to lean on. Now there's downsides to all of this, obviously, but like some of the implementation trade-offs that I understand. And so yeah, that maps well onto my understanding of the way you should build a canvas tool as well. Not that you couldn't use HTML's canvas and all of that, but you could, yeah.
With the important note there that we're not assuming that different canvas tools have access to a web-based stack. We're just kind of drawing inspiration from what's been proven to work.
Yes, exactly. It's a proven design paradigm. So in that case, like these are like minor nitpicky things to make sure I'm understanding it. Were you saying that so I heard you say content as an array of snippets, and obviously we could have other ones like other MIME types here for like rich text or something instead of just plain text. Like this should be text/plain. And you could have text/markdown and other things like that. Should we also support like content can be either a string or like array, and then you could have the ability to like specify content very simply. And if it's a string, the understanding is the MIME type is text plain, and like you don't have to infer anything. Keeps it like really nice and lightweight. I'm not sure what problems that creates for implementers, but it seems like that would be a nice trade-off for simplicity when you wanted it.
Why not? I mean, this makes the spec more hackable for human editors but we then have the burden for every parser to say, okay, if we find this thing, I need to normalize into that. So there could be a pre-processing tool to parse an OCWG file and create the canonical version of it. Obviously.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in this case, I guess, the thing we were just describing, right? These two things would be exactly the same thing. Content something and content to explain something. And so this is obviously, like you said, a lot easier for humans to write. And that is the much more robust format.
I think it's a good idea. There will probably be many nodes that have a simple string, and it doesn't make sense to give them a big burden to just write out that simple string.
That's definitely one of the nice things about JSON Canvas. It has some challenges to it, but it feels very simple. And is fairly human readable for a JSON file anyway. So but yeah, because I think their text type, they just have text as a required string, and they specify that it is markdown syntax. All right. Any other questions about or comments on the assets piece? I'll go try to write this down, Max, and add it to the spec, and then ping you on. Is this what you were saying?
Yeah, there's one more thing. So if you have the content string online inline here right now, how would you specify that the content is URI? So you look at the prefix. If the characters are HTTP, then that is a URI. So you cannot write HTTP in a label of a box. That's so. So maybe you need content and then string, or content location, and then that's something else.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Otherwise, you cannot disambiguate.
I mean, one way it could be that you either fill out content or content URI.
Yeah, this
and
would
so,
work.
Yeah, I think that's the
Okay.
Yeah. Text/markdown. Cool. I like this approach. Yeah, and then the nice thing about this, like we've already discussed, but just to reiterate one more time, is that you can have an OCWG/image. Image can handle this way, OCWG/text, other things. But other things that might need external assets. Although the interesting thing is, like, you don't even need an OCWG file either. Because the file is going to have some type, some MIME type to it, and some URI and location, that kind of stuff.
You may still want to have a file there, but you're not really talking about the asset. You're talking about representing a file preview in the canvas. Like if you wanted to have a PDF or something like that, what you're already describing is like, here's a box that happens to have a PDF in it, and maybe the implementation there is more generic to
yeah, so it's almost like OCWG/file viewer is actually the thing you're talking about. Is like this node is a pane to look at a file. So maybe it has a scroll bar on it, and maybe it has the file name at the top of it. That's interesting. Image. Just gonna make myself a note to go. I looked at this at one point. Go look at the set of MIME types supported by browsers. Okay. Cool. That was super helpful. I think I'll update that and look into it. Let's see. I think we're at a good spot. Jen, if you wanted to talk about GLTF, you're welcome to unmute. Or if you want to point me at something to narrate, either way.
Nice screen share.
Yes.
I can go through some stuff.
Yep, that'd be great. Oh yeah, I have to stop sharing. Sorry. Yes, go for it.
All right. So don't have much time, but I'll just kind of go through some stuff for anyone that wants to kind of do research afterwards, as well as drop some links to working groups. So GLTF, it's kind of described as the JPEG for 3D files. It's a JSON format, and they have an extension ecosystem, which is how, well, first there's the base spec, and then anybody can author extensions for additional features, such as there's an extension for different materials. So this is KHR dispersion. KHR, the extensions are kind of abbreviated by these things, like there's kind of vendor extensions, which usually it's the company or organization, and then whatever it is. And Kronos, they have KHR, and that's kind of like the gold standard, because Kronos Group, they work on all sorts of various open standards. They're a standards development org. And so there's all sorts of extensions, and if you choose to support one or not, it's optional, but how it looks in the metadata for these files is something like this, where let me just pull up a JSON example. So here's the KHR for dispersion, and this is a material extension. So if I can zoom in here, these are all sample assets. So I think also the way that Kronos sets up, the GLTF ecosystem is something to be inspired by. But yeah,
Mhm.
as you can see, like the extension, and if it's detected, then, you can, if you're, it's all optional. You can support it. And if you don't, then it's just using, the core GLTF thing. So all these, as well as, the standards development sort of process. At stage one, there's a proposal, an outline. You kind of get some feedback on such, kind of like, meetups that happen in groups like this. And then stage two, you want to have at least one implementation, and you also need to have valid and publicly accessible sample assets. So it also kind of exemplifies the whole file over app sort of thing, like
Mhm.
along with an implementation and something to kind of validate, share some example files and share the JSON schema in a markdown document, which they have a template for on GitHub, describing that. And then stage three, you want to have at least 2 or more implementations of such, as well as GLTF validator implementation. And there's some links to GLTF validator and some tools and whatnot that I could drop later. They have a registry for extensions. And here's the validator link, which is also open source. I believe, yeah, it looks like something drag and drop, and I kind of see that potential in like the current JSON Canvas website. It's
Mhm.
like something that you can just import and export and test stuff with. And yeah, so kind of figuring out a core spec, and then anything additional and fancy could be added as an extension. And
Yeah.
yeah, if anyone wants to kind of ask questions, do a little bit of research, and then ask people that are deeply involved. We have a weekly working group at OMI Group, Open Metaverse Introp. It's a bunch of developers from Unity, Godot, Web. Like, all of us just kind of convene on GLTF extensions. We're working on an audio extension, as well as contributing towards physics and a whole bunch of other ones that we have here, and can kind of see like where, we're kind of testing import and export between different runtimes and 3D engines and the tooling and whatnot. And it was kind of interesting in an earlier presentation here. It reminded me of a lot of conversations we're having in these 3D working groups, because we're kind of talking about an interactivity extension currently, which has a lot to do with behavior graphs. And, like Unreal
Mm.
has blueprints, and Unity has their own kind of um, similar sort of node style stuff for scripting. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of overlap between, the tooling for 3D and some of the stuff that's happening in the infinite canvas world, especially the kind of stuff that you see TL Draw doing with kind of turning these infinite canvas tools into programming environments. So worth hopping in just to learn and observe and ask questions that and yeah, if anyone else wants to I'll drop a bunch of links in the Discord as well, as for kind of research later, since we're at the hour.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I'll if you drop him in the Discord, I'll see if I can get him into a GitHub discussions as well. And see if I can dig into this stuff. Yeah, this looks, there's a lot, like you said, a lot of similarities here. In terms of, it would be really nice to have we had talked about having an OCWG validator tool online. Yeah, there's a lot we could learn from, and that the general, it's actually very encouraging to me that the general format of the specification is very similar to the approach that we're taking with between extensions and these different schemas that you can extend the base spec with. So yeah, like I'm sure there's things we could learn there.
Yeah, I'll link an example in repo which kind of shows like proposed extensions in the Discord as well, just because yeah, and they all follow a similar template as all the other kind of proposed extensions. So, yep.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Jen. That's awesome. Very neat. Does anybody else have questions for Jen about any of that while we have him, somebody who's been diving into this ecosystem?
I thought that Max had some quite good notes there that could go into the could be chucked into the canvas. I'm aware.
Yes.
We're out of time.
Yeah, it's
Agreed.
interesting how they use a more compact syntax for the extension. It's not an array of property bags, it's just special named property per extension point, so to say. And then there's a JSON object behind carrying the properties. And they sort of agreed on prefixes to avoid the misunderstanding. So there's a little bit more coordination involved, but they probably gain much better interoperability by doing that.
Yeah, that was actually one of the things that was floating around in my brain, Max, was do we need to prefix property names to prevent collisions? If we, yeah, it was the flip side of that is if you can use the yeah, in what order would you collapse two duplicate properties on top of each other? Like which one is the last writer? Which one wins? So yeah, there's some challenges around that if we didn't do that. Very cool. Okay, we are at the hour or just a minute past. I've got a bunch of to-dos between now and then to update the spec and make some and clarify a few things, but this was super helpful. Michael, thanks for building an implementation. That's, yeah, I thought I noted as well that stage one of any proposal was having at least one implementation, for GLTF. And so that was yeah, I think we're kind of going about this. Feels like we're kind of going about this the right way. So
Glad to
all
be of
right,
help.
cool. Well, I will continue to drop information into GitHub and discussion or in Discord as we work on this stuff, and I think we'll be on the books for a meeting 2 weeks from now as well. So great. All right, folks. See y'all later.
Bye, folks.
See you later. Bye bye.